You know, I can get used to this doing these shows after Arsenal win games. Slightly because of smugness. It's nice being smug a little bit. I know the chat box was enjoying the Raw Reaction show yesterday. But now I get to share the smugness with, of course, my co-hosts and regulars on today's podcast. And we'll get to some of your questions, of course, as we always do at the end. So let's crack on with the show and enjoy our third win in a row. Hello and welcome to the Goon Talk, back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our TGT podcast, the show where I'm joined by two wonderful people and Drew every single week to talk about the previous league match of our beloved Arsenal Football Club. Drew, how are you doing? Are you well?
Well, I'm mad now because you're already giving me fit.
What I will say is we're 3 wins up and your ats hasn't changed yet.
No, still there. It's going to stay there until it's like a sustained thing.
3 wins in a row is sustained.
That's not sustained. Nope. By the time my birthday rolls around, I will change it if things change.
Right. Okay. I think you're just being stubborn at this point. I feel sorry.
In a way, sure.
Unbelievable. Oh, I was about to say Omar then because I was reading him in the chat there, but we've got Eoin, not Omar. Very different person. How you doing, Eoin? Are you well?
Yeah, positive. Finally positive. We're undefeated in 2021, which is unbelievable. No, completely. In terms of where we were a couple of weeks ago, I think it's you'd be silly not to be positive at the minute. So it's good to finally come on and not be so dreary and down. But I suppose we've got Drew to level that out a little for us, don't we?
Yes, we do. Can bring us back down to earth with a solid crash. It's fair to say. Lovely stuff. Good to have you back on the show again, Eoin, as always. And making her debut on the Gooner Talk this week, we're joined by Jess, who is the host of the brand new She Knows Arsenal podcast. How you doing, Jess? Are you well?
I'm good. The world is always better when we win. So I'm feeling good. I'm excited. And thank you for having me on the show.
No problem at all. Yeah, the world's a strange place to describe right now. So when Arsenal are winning, it kind of remedies that to an extent, which we appreciate. For sure. Right, let's go straight into things and talk about, obviously, yesterday's game, which was the 3rd win in a row. Drew, it was very snowy. There was a moment where I thought the game wasn't going to go ahead at some stage, which was a little worrying. And it was almost like Kieran Tierney is born to play in this weather. Talk to me about the young Scotsman. He is kind of, for me, a revelation at Arsenal and a left-back that we've needed kind of ever since losing, well, I suppose, Ashley Cole back in the day, really.
I mean, it's been good. I think it's kind of clear now how, moving forward, we really want him to play. You know, I think sometimes you can maybe question some of his decision-making maybe when we don't have the ball, but when we do have the ball, so many good things come through him. And that's kind of really the way modern football has been trending for the last couple of years. So the fact that we have someone who can do similar things to maybe someone like a Robertson, for an example, it's a big addition. Really alleviates pressure from the wide players for the forward to be the ones to kind of create the fact that we don't really have a ton of creativity inside of midfield. So getting Tierney forward, the deliveries he can provide, it's big for us. So without trying to go into a big rant from the start, it's good to see the fact that when he's on form and you have those combinations forming down the left-hand side, it makes us so much more dangerous. So we don't have to rely on, maybe 1 or 2 other areas of the pitch being able to balance play, balance where the chances come from. It's a big deal. So he seems to be flourishing at the minute. It's nice to see him chip in with a goal. I didn't expect it. I don't think any of us expect it on his running foot as well. I was happy to see. Yeah. So you can't be more pleased with him at the minute. And for right now, I think he's been one of our best players this season overall. Him, Gabriel, both of them have been excellent. So the fact that we kind of really have a young left-sided pairing at the back and a back four seemingly nailed down moving forward, it's one less headache that we have to deal with. It's just nice to see. Like any fewer headaches right now is a good thing. So for me, I couldn't be happier with him. I think you can all probably agree with that. So.
Yeah, I wanted to start with Tierney. I know we usually go through kind of the lineup of the decisions and how we were feeling and the reaction. But I wanted to talk about him because it was just a very Tierney-esque, not only performance from him, but the day, the snow, the cold, in a T-shirt. I mean, Eoin, I see a lot of similarities in you and Tierney. I can imagine you running around in the snow with just a T-shirt on. Not that I do think about you in my personal life, but I can imagine it, son. I mean, let's kind of go back to the way we typically start the podcast, and just give me what was your raw reaction to the game in general.
Well, I suppose funny you say that. I think it was Russ put into the chat there that on the 25-minute mark of the game, I was actually doing a watch along over with Ryan at Mr. Arsenal, and the power cut out the whole grid in half the town that I live in cut out. So I'm actually literally fresh back of watching. I watched the majority of the highlights, but I watched the match in full there about an hour ago, and I think it's always good. It's something that I do quite often is go back and watch the match in full, because much like any sport, obviously the emotion that you're invested into the game at the time sort of taints your analytical view on it. And something that I was really, really pleased by watching that match back was throughout the entirety of the game, how composed and professional we were, that it wasn't just a 5-minute patch here and there, that it was consistency throughout the entirety of 90 minutes. And I think I used the analogy a while ago, Tom, when we were talking about Arsenal, said that we've been good in patches in some of the games that we lost. And I said that it's like skydiving. It's not okay to be good at skydiving for 20% of it, that it's not going to end well. And it's that it's something that I was extremely impressed with. I'd say, I'm sure we'll cover these players in more detail a bit later, but something that I loved was the sort of trio of Kieran Tierney, Emile Smith-Rowe and Bukayo Saka. And I had some concerns when we started pushing these players in, even though I had sort of requested the likes of Emile Smith-Rowe to get more game time. But something I was really impressed with was that they seemed to be relishing the sort of the burden of carrying the attacking outlet of this Arsenal side that were struggling for so long to have it. But I was quite worried about too much weight being put on their shoulders. But it really seems to me like it almost seems like those youth players have got together and say, look, we need to get our manager out of this mess, and that they've single-handedly went out and started trying to drag the team to wins. And it's the maturity that they're playing with, even in the second goal there. And again, I'll probably be running over stuff that we're going to cover in more detail later. But it's the maturity of shifting the ball from side to side and then using that sort of side-to-side lateral movement to make space. And then Emile Smith-Rowe pulls the trigger on a direct pass quite quick, and that's something that we've just lacked so much. So it was really refreshing. I think the only thing that maybe people would have had one negative before the game kicked off is the fact that Gabriel Martinelli had missed out. We had quite a break from Brighton, and we're going to have quite a break after this match where he could have been rested. So I suppose if you're looking for a negative, that's probably the one thing I maybe would say, that Gabriel Martinelli, it could have been a cricket score if that kid had him on the pitch. I think Aubameyang was quite a passenger, I thought.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about Aubameyang later. I'm going to let Drew kind of go for gold on that one, because I said he could have something to say about it, for sure. But yeah, it was an interesting kind of lineup in itself with Ceballos coming in for Elneny. I expected rotation. I kind of expected also Martinelli not to start. That didn't surprise me. He's come back from a long injury, and you want to kind of protect those assets from the club as much as possible. We saw what happens when you rush players back like Thomas Partey, and they get injured, and it's frustrating. But I think some tactical decisions were made in the right kind of sense in that game. Jess, the performance in general, looking at some of the goals from the game, I mean, Saka's goal, which is mostly down a lot to Emile Smith-Rowe and Lacazette for their interplay of how we worked that. And that goal for me was kind of the first glimpse of what could be described as Arteta ball, is what it has become to known at the club. Does that kind of goal and that movement and skill give you hope that Arteta's process or the vision that he wants this team to play is finally getting closer, and we're getting more to see of what he's expecting from this Arsenal side?
Yeah, for sure. I think that, we have seen a little bit of Arteta ball like over time, like just little glimpses of it here and there, but not on a consistent basis. But I also think the type of players that Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe and Martinelli happen to be really suit Arteta's style of play. And that's pretty much what's been missing. We've seen a little bit of it, like we saw it maybe when Arteta first came in and Ozil was playing. We saw a little bit of that fluidity, but it just wasn't on this type of scale. So I think ultimately, like as time goes on and Arteta gets more of his players in, we'll see more and more of it. And we've also been able to move into a back four, which is going to give us more offense going forward when we are able to use three in the middle, the way that we actually want to do it. So I'm excited for Arteta ball. I know I've seen it in the past. I just wanted to see it for a more sustained period with players that actually suit the system, and that's what we're seeing. So with just the integration of the couple of players from the academy that we've had, it looks really good. So I'm very hopeful for the future for Arteta and his style of football.
The style of football is so key for any Arsenal kind of coach, and you look at the fans, they're expectant not only to get results, but it's how we get those results. And when they saw this defensive, counter-attacking play, I think there was a lot of frustration when things started to go wrong. We couldn't create chances, let alone goals, and that obviously led to our very kind of poor start to the season. And it was very easy for things to exponentially get worse the less results and points we picked up. But when you start seeing us win, and not only win, but win well, like we did yesterday, and the way that we won the game, it is only going to build confidence not only within the Arsenal fan base, but within the players as well, I think. Drew, if we then kind of look at, we don't want to linger too much on the games. We end up looking kind of ahead and what does this mean, and look to the future. But I do want to pick up on a couple of things from the game, not only the goals, but it's the only criticism I have, to be honest, of the entire game. Eoin touched on it. I wanted to give you the chance to talk about it. Aubameyang in the last 10 minutes really bugged me. I don't know why it bugged me so much. I pretty much went hell for leather on the reaction show yesterday about Aubameyang's kind of body language, the way he reacted, the way he was playing at the end of the match. And I know that he ran his socks off at 80 minutes. But when you're the captain and when you're the leader, and even though I know that's not his characterisation whatsoever, but it just frustrated me. How did you feel seeing him in that moment? Was it a level of, yeah, that's Aubameyang, classic, that's what he's like, I'm not surprised. But I know that he can be like that, but I want to know how you feel about that personally as someone who's watched Aubameyang, not only at Arsenal, but at Dortmund as well.
I think some of it is really down to the fact that he's not scoring at the minute. And, when you're a forward and your game is very predicated on goals, anyone gets frustrated about it. So I'm not, shockingly enough, I'm not kind of holding it over his head as much as maybe I would in times past. His thing is his role is going to change. So kind of for me moving forward, I want to see how he kind of adapts to it. He might not be now that main focal point. It's not going to be just about getting Aubameyang goals anymore. It was at Dortmund. It was when we first brought him in, which is why we played a certain brand of football in the final third to make sure he gets on the end of service as much as possible. But I don't think that's what we're going to have moving forward. And you kind of see the combination play you have with Lacazette and Smith Rowe and Saka. And you saw when Martinelli was on that left-hand side in place of Aubameyang, the things that he would bring to the table that Aubameyang doesn't really do with any regularity. So I think for me, he needs to find his footing again. He's definitely not in form right now. Again, he's going to be frustrated by that. But yeah, I think maybe yesterday it's, again, when someone wants to score goals and you score the amount that we did and got the chances that we did, when chances aren't falling to him, he does get a little bit frustrated with that. But that said, again, when you are a captain, you kind of want a little bit more. I mean, that still requisite mentality that maybe he does lack a bit. So, I mean, I'm not trying to analyze it too much. I think maybe people have overanalyzed it. But what I would say is if it continues, then I wouldn't necessarily be surprised. But at the minute, I think it's all right for now. So, yeah.
No, fair enough. I think that it will be something to kind of study and analyse over the next few games and see how, if he starts, of course, and something else I want to come on to a little bit later with the questions about how and if Arteta does have kind of the front, as I describe it, to drop our captain if necessary. And I think that ultimately, if he does, you've got the confidence that this young coach does have the ability to make some tough decisions. And I think that's one of the things he struggled with this season is making some tough calls, leaving some players out like Willian that he's wanted to trust to drag us out of these poor situations. And ultimately they haven't done that. And now maybe he's seeing some of these decisions that he's making and the changes that he's making is working. He'll be more inclined to make some tougher choices and to make some different decisions and maybe look back on what he's done and say, that didn't necessarily work. And maybe I need to change things more than I have done. If we then look at kind of the context of Arsenal on a whole, with the result of Chelsea today, Chelsea a few weeks back were described as title challengers. and Arsenal are described as relegation fodder. I think I saw a tweet, which is quite insane. We're 3 points behind Chelsea now. Now, I know they've gone on a pretty poor run, but they're still up there at the top half of the table, and we're only 3 points behind them now. In the context of the season, asking you specifically, because we've had a chat on the channel a couple of times where you are very much not staunch, but inclined to be like, look, I think we need to change things. It's getting too bad now. We can't carry on like this. How do you feel about Arsenal now? How do you feel about them in the context of the league, and what do you think can be possible this season?
It's a strange season, obviously. Look, the first thing I'll say is that I think to jump on anybody over their feelings or the feelings that they're sort of amplifying, whether it's on social media or on a podcast at the minute, is a little harsh, to be honest, because the way I put it is that sort of globally we're all going through our own little things with in terms of lockdowns and different people's circumstances of shielding and blah blah blah. And the truth is that 2020 and obviously the beginning of 2021 probably hasn't been the best year for everybody as a whole. And I think that football is the one thing that people tend to cling to in sort of tough times. And so now with sort of normal day-to-day life being sort of so dire, I think that our love for the game has only amplified. So I think that works both ways. If you're doing well, we're all going to be going mental like we sort of were after the Chelsea game. And I think when we're doing bad, it's also amplified. So I think in terms of being overreactionary, I think that there's going to be quite normal. But do I think it was being overreactionary? I don't think it was. When I said that I think we should have moved Arteta on, because to me there was no evidence that he was going to turn it around. The prospect of us beating Chelsea always seemed sort of far-fetched. You know what I mean? It's like, for example, if I was to put a bet on a horse that was sort of 25-1 to win, and I came in and I won, am I entitled to sort of call people stupid for not putting that bet on? No, because just because it came in this time doesn't mean that sort of going by the odds that it was that was the most probable outcome, and it wasn't looking like it, to be honest with you. But I suppose my question always is that what was my realistic target when the summer transfer window closed? Well, mine was sort of that we would finish about 5th-ish. Do I think that's achievable now? No, probably not. But given the context of what has happened, I think that qualifying for Europe would be an absolutely massive achievement this season. But for me, my sort of stance was always, I would love to see what Arteta could do after January, once he acquired some of the players to fit his system and shifted some of this dead wood. We've got a very bloated squad, and when I say bloated, I don't even mean in terms of the people that are going out onto the pitch. I mean that if you have a squad of 30 people, you can only play so many of them, and you're going to have almost 50% of your playing squad unhappy, and that creates a toxic environment. And for me, I just want to see what Arteta can now do while shifting players out and sort of bringing in some of his own. So in terms of where do I sort of sit with Arsenal and Arteta in particular at the minute, I would say that to me this season now, given these current results and the fact that we've escaped this relegation fight that we're supposedly in, it's sort of a free hit in my opinion. And in terms of Arteta, he showed some promising signs. I know that some people said that he was limited to sort of make some of the changes that he's made, but I think he's been brave to stick by some of them as well. So he showed some positive signs, which was always going to be the case of taking on a rookie manager, is that he was going to make mistakes. It's just sort of whether he can learn from those mistakes. And I think when it was coming down to sort of crunch time, he seems to show that he can be sort of show a willingness to change, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And that was always going to be the big thing, that I think Arteta was either going to die on the sword of Willian, or he was going to try and change the way that he wanted to not only play, but the way that he picked the team. I was very much on the line of, he can't go to the 4-3-3 unless Partey's back, because we just don't have the quality in the central part of the midfield to hold that down. And I think there's been elements of players coming back, and Emile Smith-Rowe coming in. Martinelli and him have been unbelievable together, and the way that they press and provide that energy and for Arsenal is so key to how we have changed our kind of emphasis on the way in we attack and also the way we defend with those. So we defend from the front now, which is something that we hadn't done at the start of the season. And oppositions kind of bypassed our front line and midfield so many times. It was so frustrating that it was all days down to not even the whole defence, because Bellerin had run up the other end of the pitch and left holding on his own. So it was basically down to our two centre-backs to deal with the whole opposition at most points during the start of the season. And now it is completely different. Jess, what happened before was interesting because when you look at the way in which the club was viewed, it was all very much like things are getting worse. They aren't going to get better. I can't see where a win's coming from. I can't see where a goal's coming from, let alone actually picking up 3 points. What, other than like the youth, I know is an obvious thing, but do you think Arteta's done anything specific with systems, tactics that has changed where we are right now? Is everyone muted on mine? Sorry, I think is everyone muted? Yeah, sorry, Jess, I think you're on mute quickly. You want to just click those microphone buttons. There we go. For a minute, that was weird because everyone muted and I was, what? I don't know how I managed that.
I think it's hard to put your finger on just because I think the like Martinelli and Emile Smith-Rowe and Saka have added such like good energy, and then they also have a lot of quality within them. So it's hard to put my finger on what specifically Arteta has actually done besides stuck with the system that he wants to play and putting the right people in the places to be able to make that system work. Because I never really bought into the whole like Arteta had such a structured system that nobody could move and nobody could make runs. And I think that was decisions made by the certain players that were out there because they didn't trust each other. You know, the difference between having a Martinelli and a Saka on the wings and having an Aubameyang and a Willian is that you have young players that are willing runners that want to get on the ball, want to press, want to make the runs over and over and over again. And I think it's just more right people in the right system versus Arteta changing anything specifically. I think this is a system he always wanted to play, and we needed to get the right people in it, so I don't really think he changed much. I didn't really believe he needed to take the handbrake off. I really do think that some of the older players just didn't want to do certain things, so it wasn't coming off. So
no, I think that it's definitely that her level of personnel, the amount of times that the counter argument to people that wanted Arteta to maybe move on was the squad's not good enough. It doesn't matter what Arteta does, you're never going to get a good tune out of these players. And weirdly, it has only taken the introduction of one or two youth players and everything has changed. The emphasis on the team has changed, and not even maybe just people coming in, but some players, of course, moving out. Willian not being included, Louise maybe not being included, Xhaka having that 3-match kind of suspension to maybe get his head right a little bit more has changed things. Even Gabriel moving out and Marie coming in has changed things in that department. I think there was a couple of questions in the chat box, which we'll save for later on, about Marie too. But there just seems a whole different kind of ethos around the place. The mentality's changed, the feel and the environment has changed, and all it's taken is a couple of results. Now, Drew, it is very, very obvious that if we go into, say, the next 2 league games against Palace, and I think Newcastle is the other one as well after we play them in the FA Cup, if we weren't to pick up points in those games, things could change back very, very quickly. And it's during a period where he needs to find the balance. He needs to find the right rhythm. We have got the opportunity to play these games not in so close proximity to each other as we have done over games over the Christmas period. So there's opportunity to rest. There's opportunity to even play the same lineup a few times in a row because you've got that week's break as you would do during a normal season. Are you concerned of Arteta now he has the likes of Willian back, who of course was brought on instead of, say, £72 million Nicola Pepe yesterday, which I found shocking. I couldn't believe that Willian was the one that was brought on over our huge investment, but he was. Are you concerned that there is the scope that Arteta may revert to type and choose those same players again?
I mean, he has to. You have to rotate. So FA Cup is coming up, and then we've got, Palace on the horizon. We have Europa League starting up again soon, and we have a really bad run of a difficult run of 10 league fixtures on the bounce where, back to back to back, where you're going to have to rotate, especially if we're looking to target a deep run in FA Cup, or if we're trying to get past Benfica in the first round, knockout round of the Europa League. So there has to be rotation. It's the nature of it. It's just a matter of when you pick and choose when you rotate and how you rotate. That's, for me, is what matters. And the biggest question now is if you rotate out Smith Rowe, who goes into that position? Because building off of what Jess said, I think Arteta showed when he first came in how that he wanted to play with a player in that position because he started Mesut Ozil every match when Arteta first came in that same role. So I think it was clear that he wanted a link between the center forward and the midfield. It's just a matter of things went south with Mesut Ozil and there was no one available at that time to play in that role in the side. We didn't have someone who could be a number 10 that would float around or an 8-10 hybrid. Dennis Ceballos isn't really that player. None of the midfielders can play there. None of the wide players can really perform there. So it was we had to move away from something else to kind of offset the fact that it wasn't working. And whenever we had Lacazette come deeper, his goal form kind of suffered. So again, I think if it's a matter of sticking to what works as an ethos, as an approach, and then finding and plugging in players that'll work in certain roles. We still don't know if maybe Willian will come in that. And similar to Smith Rowe and play there, may be a bit more effective than if he's chucked out on the right. We really don't know. So, for me, I think it's just a matter of consistency. And it's when you rotate the side, you don't change how you play. Even when you rotate the players, you find players that fit into the puzzle slots that make you able to still go out and play that same tactical approach, which is why you have sides like Liverpool and City. They can be consistent in the way they play because they have players that you can just slot in and nothing has to change. That's the big thing for me. If we're starting to change our approach because of who we have available, then we have a bigger problem. It shows where work needs to be done. But for the moment, I'm not really concerned. It's a matter of just building on it one at a time. So, you go into the FA Cup looking to get a result, you build on that for Palace, and then you want to make sure you have some measure of consistency on performance. That's why I haven't changed my yet. Just what you asked earlier. Because if in 3 matches, if we lose the next 3, then we're back to square one, as you say. Or if we don't pick up wins the next, we're back to square one, as you say. So it's just taking it one step at a time for now, making sure you build the confidence, making sure you build the performance levels, week on week, and then take it from there. And going into March. So.
Yeah, it is going to be a case of taking things game by game, which means I can get excited over a 4-0 win against West Brom, which is great. But it's always remember to stay grounded and to look at ultimately the long-term picture. It is so important now that Arsenal do pick up these points in these couple of games because after Crystal Palace and Newcastle in the league, we have got Southampton again, who I think the Southampton game is the most interesting game so far because if you look at the performance that we put in against them at the Emirates when things were as low as they could pretty much be for Arsenal, we managed to kind of grind a point out of that game. And that was really a bit of a foundation for us to then push on. I think we lost the next game after Southampton, but just seeing that fight from the guys to hold on to that point after going down to 10 men, there was signs, I thought, in that game that maybe there is still fight in this team, and clearly there was. So when we do come up against Southampton or a side up there, if they win against Liverpool, which I know is a very long shot, they go joint third in the table. They're having an excellent season. So if we can get something from that game and improve on the performance we had against them at the Emirates, I think that would be a good kind of barometer to see where Arsenal have come in that kind of month period or 2-month period since we last played them. Eoin, we can't really look ahead with Arsenal without talking about the current month that we are in, which is silly season, of course, and talking about January. I want to link this into a bit of a chat about Emile Smith-Rowe. I saw a couple of rumours and links today that our interest in Isco has cooled, which I'm slightly pleased about because I wasn't too keen on the guy anyway. But it's frustrating to see that kind of story for me still. I want us to keep grounded, but what I'm worried is that we'll do a very Arsenal thing of thinking things are okay, not making any moves in January that we might need to, because whilst we do have a very bloated squad, and for me January is more about moving players on, the area of the pitch which does need depth added to it is that central creative attacking midfield area. We do need to add something, whether it's a 6-month loan until the summer where we can sign a marquee player, or whether it's signing a 6-month, a permanent player like a Buendia or a Sobos. No, I'm joking.
You're still clinging on, man.
I'm still clinging on to Sobosla, yeah. No. But what's your kind of view on that? Are you very much in line with how I'm thinking, or do you think there is enough depth in that position with Emile Smith-Rowe's kind of emergence that we could last maybe until the end of the season? Ozil. What about Ozil? Because he's there. Yeah.
Depth, quality, that's debatable. I think quality with what I have seen from Emile Smith-Rowe and the small sort of sample size that we have, I'd say we have quality in that area right now, but depth, absolutely not. I don't think that we have depth. I think that the damage that I'll cover this one quick because it's an easy one. The damage that it would do to the reputation internally of Mikel Arteta and Edu to put Mesut Ozil back in the playing squad in January, it wouldn't be worth it. So for me, no, absolutely not. In terms of in terms of what avenue you would go down, I don't like the loan deal. I never like a 6-month loan deal, simply because I don't think it gives a person enough time to buy into the culture of the club, and I think that it could almost sort of block the path of someone like Emile Smith-Rowe if an Isco comes in. You know, the Mikel Arteta and the club might feel that they need to get their money's worth, so they play the player over maybe Emile Smith-Rowe. And I think that we've talked about this numerous times before. I think that a lot of the time there's too much emphasis put on sort of like mommy coddling these players into the starting 11. I think that once you start to hit the age of 19, 20, that's when you really need to start to be pushing to become a sort of consistent member within a starting 11. I know that some players develop a little bit later, but the vast majority of players you can tell around that age whether they're going to be a talent or not. So in terms of what I would do, look, it's the figures that I've seen being sort of bummed about for Emi Buendia that really makes that deal very appealing, and also the fact that he can play in a couple of different positions is good as well. And I suppose when you're securing that player on a permanent deal, look, if he goes out and outperforms Emile Smith-Rowe and Emile Smith-Rowe ends up sitting on the bench, well, look, it's for the betterment of the club. I have no sort of personal interest in following just one player and wanting to see him succeed. It's the club that I want to see succeed, you know. So in terms of, yeah, I think as Arsenal fans we do this a lot, and this is something that I worry about all the time, is that once we hit a decent run of form, is that we sort of over exaggerate the strength of our positions. But the one thing I would say is that is maybe that rather than highlighting so much like this creative, the lack of creativity and the lack of creative players from midfield, we could go for a cheaper alternative and maybe place the vast majority of the money that we have elsewhere. Like, I know it's probably unrealistic and you're going to shoot me down straight away, but playing against Brighton, man, Basuma, that's a Premier League proven player, and looks he's the real deal. You know, even for an underperforming Brighton side that day, he looked head and shoulders above the majority of players on the pitch, and it would be frightening to see him beside Thomas Partey, who we're also yet to see the best of. So I don't know. It's a tricky one for them, but look, apparently everything's fine. Edu and Arteta have told us that their plans have been long set in stone.
Like Ross from Friends.
Yeah,
Oh, are you done? We're going to carry on.
I'm stopping for a drink. I'm at a halfway point. No, I'm just messing. No, look, I think as we've mentioned before, we did a podcast over with Mike and Andy last week, and exactly. I'm the big guy in town over there now. No, but he actually made the title of the podcast "Addition by Subtraction." And I actually thought that was quite a clever play on words.
That might be the cleverest Mike's ever been.
I know it was. I'm pretty sure Andy came up with it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Makes sense now. No, but for me, that's what it is. It's that, look, I'm not expecting us to go out and spend 100 million in a January transfer window. They're notoriously difficult to navigate. Clubs don't really want to be letting go, and then we also have COVID in the mix as well. That sort of so. For me, it's about pushing players out the door, and if we can get in someone, I think like a Buendia is, to me, that would be the most realistic target that we should be going for. I think the price tag, the profile of the player, the positions that he can occupy, the system that we're trying to play, I think he's probably the perfect fit. It's just whether we can obtain him or not.
He adds so much for me because he's not an out cam. To be honest, he's playing more kind of skewed to the right hand side for Norwich at the moment as well. And whilst he can play at number 10, he can play on either side of the attacking midfield. He adds depth as well as quality to Arsenal, and I think that is ultimately key. And Premier League experience as well. You don't have to worry about the whole new Brexit signing point situation either, because he's coming from a Championship side now. So that's also a positive for it. Others will cite that we should be looking maybe higher and targeting higher, but I've been and the same with Basuma, I've been such on the hype train of trying to promote this sign, Premier League proven, sign players that have played in England for a consistent amount of time now, because they don't need time to transition. They can come in and they can hit the ground running because they're used to the competition and the strenuous times of the league. Before we just move on to the next question, we have reached kind of the halfway stage of the pod, which is the opportunity I'm going to take to shout out a giveaway, which we've got, which we don't typically do on the show, but because these are very trying times at the moment due to COVID, we've tried to help some local and small businesses out relating to kind of football and Arsenal recently. If you remember, we did a beer mats giveaway a little while ago. Well, now is the opportunity to win an Arsene Wenger print regarding all of his years in the style of the London Underground. This is going out to the Football Art Club, which is the football artist, looking at lots of different footballistic kind of things. And if you want a chance of winning it, I'll put a link to the tweet in the chat box. All you have to do is follow us, follow them, and retweet it, and you can have a chance to win it. I think Gary Hardy may have won the last competition we did, who, of course, is one of our members. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be a member to win it. Otherwise, I would be entering about 10 times. Anyone could win this, and it's not limited to the UK either. It's global. They're willing to post this out to anywhere across the planet. So feel free to enter just by retweeting and following us and the football artist as well. And you could be in a chance with winning the Wenger years Arsenal trophy map. So get on it and good luck with winning it. I've seen that Drew's already retweeted it and followed it about 5 times, so he wants to win it clearly. Look at his face. Look at his happy face. Let's move on to the final kind of look ahead before we go into, of course, user questions. Jess, we've got Newcastle in the FA Cup, which is, it comes at an annoying time because I'd really like us to kind of carry on with the league and just see where we're going to position ourselves. But we have a very romantic connection with the FA Cup. We've won it more than anyone else. And obviously we'd like to progress through it again and do quite well. How do you think that Arteta needs to tackle this? How does he does he need to rest certain players? Do we need to bring in the likes of Willian, give Pepe more of a run out? How does Arteta tackle this one?
I think it's tricky just because of what you said. Like, we want to keep the momentum going. We want to keep, the relationships that are forming between like Martinelli and Emile Smith-Rowe and Saka and Tierney to keep going. But at the same time, I think this is a good opportunity to get some of the fringe players out there, not only just for them to get back into form, but for some people that we may be interested in moving on. We might want people to be able to see them. I'm thinking about somebody like Pepe. I don't see very many opportunities for him playing in the league moving forward. So maybe get him out there, maybe get Aubameyang out there. Maybe he can get a goal or two, and just rotate the squad. I would take this opportunity to rotate because with the run that we're going to have in the league moving forward, I want the players that are in the system that it's really working for to have the opportunity to play in the league. And let's see what like Willian and Pepe and the other players have in the FA Cup and see if they can nail down something and then just move forward from there. So that's how I would like to see Arteta, use the FA Cup in this particular setting. I really wouldn't maybe give Martinelli a run out for like the last 30 minutes, like give Aubameyang 60, give Martinelli 30 or something like that. But I think this is a game for the fringe players to see like, what do you have going? Like, why should you be playing in the league? Because as far as I'm concerned, from what I've seen in the last 3 games, they shouldn't just walk into the squad. Like, we should just keep the chemistry going and keep that ride going. So the FA Cup is their turn to try to nail down their spot.
I think that as I said already, it comes at a really awkward time. You want to keep that league momentum going. And in a way, there's an argument to say maybe you do keep the likes of Smith-Rowe in, who has kind of built up this form, and maybe giving him a 2-week break would interrupt that. And it's very difficult to kind of balance things whilst giving players an opportunity to play. The opposition being Newcastle is difficult in itself because Newcastle's relationship with cup competitions is a funny one. They typically don't go too far and have gone out in the 3rd round of the FA Cup quite a few times in the history as well, in the last 10 years even. And they take it still quite seriously, even with a poor history in it, and typically play quite strong sides. I don't expect Steve Bruce to rest too many players. I expect him to play quite a lot of his first string squad. So I imagine that Pepe will get a chance. Partey coming back into training, will he get a few minutes to try and transition him in and give him I wouldn't be starting him. I wouldn't go anywhere near starting Partey in this game. But maybe it's an opportunity to bring him on later in the game to give him the opportunity to get a few minutes on the pitch, building up to coming back to full fitness and starting. But it's a weird one, and it's something that we're going to have to wait and see what Arteta ultimately does. As we come down to the final 15, 20 minutes of the show, this is, of course, is the chance for you guys to be throwing questions into the chat box for our fantastic guests to answer. We try and get through as many of them as feasibly possible, and we've already got them coming in, which is great. So, Drew, we have a question from Balaji who says, which player profile fits for our team better, a Jean Jordan or a Brandt?
I think it depends on what you would use them for. I don't know as much about Jordan as you would, so that's a question for you. But for Brandt, like for me, we wouldn't be buying him to use him as a winger. He's very much more of a center player now. He's a player that can easily play the role that Smith Rowe's playing and do quite well. And he's a player that you can use in the midfield too if we're going to have the lion's share of possession, and you want someone to help break down the deep block, because he'd come in and be probably one of the best, if not the best, technicians at the club. He's that good with the ball. So again, it kind of just really depends on what Arteta wants to do moving forward. I think Xhaka has been pretty all right in the last 3-4 matches when we've been performing. He's looked good, but teams haven't really been getting at him in a way that's going to expose his weaknesses. So we haven't had to worry about it. And yeah, it just kind of depends all about what you want. You know what I mean? So, but for me, you're going to want to bring in a player who's going to want to play, right? So the fact that Brandt hasn't really been first choice often this season, he's not going to want to leave Dortmund to come to Arsenal and not play every week, So if you're looking at it from a logical standpoint, maybe Jordan comes in and suits more of that Xhaka role now, maybe, than maybe you want to see from Brandt. For me, I think Brandt's better when he's further forward. Just because he can play an 8 doesn't mean I'd want him for the 8. I think I'd probably want him for the 10. But then again, you have to go with Smith Rowe, really. If he keeps playing the way he is, you don't want to bring someone in to maybe cut out his pathway to being a first choice player, by next season. So, but again, I guess it depends, for me. I don't really know, honestly. I'm biased. I'll always go with Brandt, but it's also because I don't know as much about Jordan as maybe he does. So I can only answer it from maybe like a 75%.
Yeah.
So.
Obviously, from doing the podcast we did together talking about Brandt and hearing you talk about him, when I look at Arsenal right now, I'd rather we had a Jordan to partner Partey with Emile Smith-Rowe playing in kind of that attacking midfield role. Like, I'm happy with him, and I understand what Eoin was saying earlier about the depth that we desperately need. We do, to be honest, we need to sign both. That's the bottom line. We need both of them. But finding Partey an as good or nearly as good partner is so pivotal to what Arsenal want to do probably next season. If that can be done in January, great. I don't really see it happening in January. It'll probably happen more to the summer. But Arsenal need that Partey partner to make us a really solid kind of team in midfield. Because if we're being real, like, I can defend Xhaka all day long, and we could talk about Sabas, we could talk about El Neni, with Sabas leaving anyway at the end of the season from his loan. Arsenal need to upgrade on that centre midfield position next to Partey. We got the first piece of the puzzle. We got Partey in, which is great. And was arguably the perfect guy that we could have brought in had we have also signed a creative player on top of that in the summer. We didn't do that, and his fitness has been horrific, which is not akin to him whatsoever. He's never faced injury issues prior to his move, which is incredibly unlucky and very Arsenal. But I think it does come down to Arsenal need both. But when you're looking at this season specifically, in the last 6 months, do I prefer we go for a Jordan now and a Brandt in the summer, or vice versa? If Emile Smith-Rowe goes or is injured or needs a rest, like, I struggle again to see where that creativity essentially comes from. So we probably need to prioritise the creative attacking midfield player over the Jordan type player, even though I'd love us to sign both types of players, not specifically those two.
But I think that's part of it, though. I think ideally we're in a position where we have to understand that we do need both. I think we could probably all agree with that. But again, it's I don't know enough about him. But for Brandt, it's like, just because he can play inside of midfield, that's not what I think we should be buying him for. You should be buying him to play a more advanced role. You want him to be in a more advanced role. It's where he's best. You're not going to want to spend, again, Dortmund are going to want between 30 and 40 million for him. Or you're going to want to spend that kind of money and play him in a position where he's not at his brightest. Then you're wasting your money. If you're going to spend that much money and you're going to want to play him in an attacking role where you see what he really truly can do, how creative he actually is. He's good on the ball. He drives play. He has an eye for goal. You want to see all those things in this game. If you're going to spend that kind of money, you're not going to spend money on a player who you're going to see him at, maybe 75 or 80%, so it depends on how you want to build the squad in the summer. But first of all, I don't think we'd get him in January in the first place, but that's a whole other discussion anyway. I think it would be, you would see it more like a summer signing anyway, regardless of that. So
let's move on to the next question, which comes in the form of a super chat. So thank you, Ariane, so much for the donation. Owen, he says, would a player like Rodrigo de Paul, who's at Udinese currently, be a good option? According to SofaScore, he has made 10 big chances this season, which is only 2 or 3 behind the likes of De Bruyne and Grealish. Also, would you give the likes of Aziz and Kurjan a chance against Newcastle?
In terms of De Paul, I'm sorry, I've recently had a child this year, and my knowledge
You've not been watching Serie A? What?
I haven't at all. Do you want to know what? I'm going to be open about this. I absolutely slated Serie A there a couple of months ago on this podcast, so I've never been mad into Italian football, to be honest with you. But in terms of Aziz and that, yeah, I would. I know that it's something very difficult for Arsenal fans to hear, but obviously the FA Cup is something that we sort of cherish and hold quite close to our hearts. But to me, that's not the priority this season. Everything should be in the league. And to be honest with you, it's funny because normally you would say throw the kids out there, but I think we've got almost enough senior fringe players who have been exiled from the squad that could take up that sort of second string team. Arguably, I would even say that Aubameyang should be dropped down to that side to play against Newcastle. But definitely, look, from what I've seen from Aziz, I think that while we say that we can't put too much pressure on youth, it's important not to overlook the talents that they're obviously displaying. And to me, someone like Aziz looked very mature on the ball, very calm under pressure, much more so than probably the alternatives that we have in like Granit Xhaka and Dani Ceballos. He looked fantastic, that be it against lower level Europa League opposition. But he's someone that I think could have a bright future at the club. I often say that, quite early on, whether a player has quite a high ceiling, and I think that we have quite a few players that haven't shown that yet, but I think he's one that, from the little that I have seen of him, he seems like he could be an absolute world beater in years to come.
I think there's an elegance about Aziz's play on the ball. He kind of glides with that ball across the pitch. I enjoyed doing the player profile on him for 101, and we're actually doing one about Kurjan as well. I've already got Next Generation Arsenal, you probably follow on Twitter, has provided me with an expert piece on him. So that's going to be interesting when that finally does get some love in the planning of the pieces, which is very busy right now in the festive period. Let's move on. And I'll get to that Christopher fun question for you when we get back around. Sam says, Jess, should we just bring Ozil into the squad as a backup for Smith Rowe? I'm going to give that wonderful debate of a question to you.
Well, I mean, I've thought about it, and when we were originally linked with Isco and Eriksson, like my initial thought was, if we're gonna bring in an aging 10, we might as well use Mesut Ozil. But that's thinking about it from just a pure like playing perspective, not thinking about the repercussions of bringing somebody like that clearly has issues or has a strained relationship with the club and potentially the coach. I just don't think there's any way to walk back from that at this point. Like, I think it would look bad on Arteta. It would look bad on the executives to bring him back. And it's just, once you put your foot down, you kind of have to go with it and fall on that sword. Like, you can't roll back on it. You saw as soon as Unai Emery tried to roll back on that during his tenure, it didn't work out for him. It's almost like you just undermine yourself. So, and you're thinking about it just from a pure like player standpoint, yeah, it would be nice to have Ozil and Emile Smith-Rowe backing each other up. You don't have to spend any additional money. He's already on the books. He's still a good player. He can still add something to the squad. But unfortunately, because of the strained relationship between Ozil and the club and the obvious joke of a situation that this has become, we can't bring him back into the squad. I can't see it. It's not realistic. And personally, I'd rather just go on with Smith Rowe and see out the season and maybe bring in somebody to partner Thomas Partey than bring in an Eriksen or Isco or try to bring Ozil back in. I think I don't want any of those options. So
yeah, no, the Ozil questions. It's an interesting kind of case study to look at. Financially, we talked about when we were linked to Isco about why don't I? Well, you've got Ozil there, you've got him for 6 months. Why don't you just play him? But the politics around bringing him back in. I don't know if you guys saw his tweet yesterday, which I don't really like reading into tweets too much, but it was so obvious. It was so obvious.
You didn't have to do much reading into it.
It was shady. It was very shady.
It was shady. And it was very kind of disguised as a compliment to Emile Smith Rowe. And a couple of people, when I quote tweeted it by saying, I can't remember what I said. I think it was I think I can read between the lines, mess it or something like that. And a couple of people replied saying, he's just complimenting Emile Smith Rowe. And it is a level of naivety to not see clearly what he's saying about a number 10. If he'd wanted to compliment Smith Rowe, he could have just tweeted saying, amazing performance, Smith Rowe, smashing it at the moment, something like that. But he had to point out the number 10 position where it was so, I don't need to explain it to you listeners. You're educated enough to understand how shady it was, as Jess very eloquently put it. Matt Thornton says, Tom, would you look at Isaac as a striking option in the summer? He looks very good. Obviously, great prospect at Dortmund at his time when he was there, as Drew will know. When he's transitioned to La Liga and Real Sociedad, it's not gone amazingly. He's not prolific by any. I think he's got something like 3 goals this season. I think he moved for around £5 million, £6 million. It was not a big fee. But as a backup, I don't know why we should be prioritising who we should be signing. Arsenal, if anything, should prioritise nailing Balogun down to a new deal, moving Nketiah on for a decent fee, who I just personally don't see having a future at the club. And then you've got the forgotten man, Tyrese John-Jules, who's having a very good loan season at Doncaster. And I know it's only League One, but he can only beat what's in front of him in that loan deal. And he's someone that has a future that the club do rate and someone that they will definitely put kind of emphasis on next season, I feel, if Nketiah is indeed sold or if Balogun seemingly inevitably does move on. So I don't think Arsenal should be looking at backup strikers at the moment. I think we have very, very much pressing matters to attend to. Drew, was there any questions that you picked out specifically that you wanted to answer, or are you going to make me pick?
About Guendouzi?
What's that, sorry?
Matthew's question about Guendouzi.
Yes, was that right at the start of the pod? It was, wasn't it? So I won't be able to throw it out. But Matthew asked earlier on, is it true Guendouzi is doing very well in Germany?
He's been solid or good. I wouldn't say he's been, apparently looking at Jess's cleavage now. Awesome.
Jesus, Jet, Drew.
Anyway, no, he's been solid to good, but the issue is Hertha's balance in midfield is really, really poor. They don't have any creativity in their midfield. They don't have any players that can drive play. They have Lucas Toussaint, Santiago Gacibar, those type of players who they're defensive first midfielders. They win the ball, they pass it off to somebody, can do something, they can pick the ball and kind of drive play. And it's kind of why he looked really good under Emery for me, why he was the only one that we had in midfield at that time that could drive play, that could be a bit more mobile, be a bit more forward thinking. So I think kind of masked a lot of the negatives in this game. So I think for me, that was kind of the problem. And similarly at Hertha, where again, they lack that player. I think he looks a little bit better than he actually is. It's not that he's been poor, but I think his influence and actual contributions to an actual level player being a bit overstated. Essentially, it's either him or Matthias Cunha, who plays kind of like a attacking midfield / second striker role, who are the only ones that can really be creative at any level at all. And if they're not doing anything, then Hertha's not doing anything. But with Partey at the club now, with us looking at the likes of Julian and Brandon, does Guendouzi have a role to play at the club moving forward? Is he going to mature at all? I think that's the thing. It's even if he can come back to the club and bring something, if he's still not going to mature as that type of player that Arteta wants to work with, it becomes a moot point. I think people have to understand that he has a track record now of maturity problems. The PSG, Lorient, both managers had issues with him. Now we've had our issues with him. Is he going to mature? So I think at a certain point you have to realize that something else trumps the fact that he might be a decent player for us. So for me, I mean, yeah, he's been okay, he's been good, but I would still rather just bin him and move on. I think there are better options for me personally, but that's just obviously my take. So
I think it's certainly something that with Guendouzi, for me, can't get past the personality kind of side of it. If the reason he's not here now is because he didn't apologise, that's very, very obvious. For whatever he did, we don't know what he did specifically. He did a lot more than what just happened. What we saw against Brighton, a lot has gone on behind the scenes. He had the opportunity to apologise. We've seen it now, not only with Guendouzi but Saliba. If there's any professionality issues behind the scenes, the club are dealing with them in very, very strict ways. If you read the piece we put out on 101 about Saliba and the reasons why he's not playing at the moment, it comes down to the professionalism of the player. And if the same with Guendouzi, the same with Saliba, is the reasons why both of them have not played. Saliba's been kept around, of course. Guendouzi hasn't, because he categorically has refused to apologise. And I don't see a future for him. Whatever he does in Germany is good for us, because we can get a bigger fee for him when we need to move him on. So that's what I take from that. You should keep in touch, like looking at how he's doing, because hopefully it does get us that little bit more money when we need it in the summer. And money is certainly something that Arsenal will need for sure. So hopefully we can get a very decent fee. Paul Bradley says Matteo didn't have anything to apologise for. Paul must be in there behind the scenes, knowing exactly what's going on, to know what's going on there. Christopher Fung had a question earlier on for Owen, which I'm going to scroll up to try and find, although it may have disappeared. No, here we go. Christopher Fung says, with a lot of prospects coming through the academy, how do you balance giving them opportunities with the first team and purchasing 22 to 25-year-olds that could block the paths of those players?
Well, see, this is something I was actually thinking of earlier today, and it's with the sort of prospect of us missing out on Europe completely this season and going into next season. We've seen this season and last season how vital it can be to give some of those fringe players some minutes and really sort of make an impact and sort of try and push their way into our starting 11 or get into contention for those places. So number one, Europe is absolutely massive. I think for players like this. Now, there was another question, funny, I think, that ties in with this one as well, and it's that I actually think that this is a situation that we could possibly exploit, because there was a couple of questions surrounding Brexit, and before I go on with this, I'm a moron, as I constantly say, and I'm pretty sure that Drew's going to jump in after me and tell me how wrong I am and why, but I'm going to try to pursue and push on through this. Essentially, with the changes to the game that Brexit is causing, I think that we have an abundance of youth, quite talented youth, some of them that I don't think will maybe end up sort of being the cream that rises to the top, the likes of Eddie Nketiah, Joe Willock and Reece Nelson, and I'm sure that there's a lot of other players as well that could fall into that bracket. And I think now that it is going to be so tough to sign players from outside of the Premier League and so costly in comparison to what it would have been, I think that we could, like, if you look at Liverpool there, moved Brewster on for an extortionate fee. You know, we have seen a lot of youth players being moved on for extortionate fees, and I think that now's the time that if we are going to sell, that this is a situation that Arsenal could possibly exploit to gain some much needed funds to sort of inject into the first team. And like we said, in terms of what, going back to Chris's question, the main thing is not to have a bloated squad, really. I think, if we look back at some of the all-time great teams, none of them had a roster of 30 to 35 players or whatever it was. It was always maybe like a 19, 20-man squad, and some of the youth being broken through then. So in terms of that, I think it's just about trimming the fat of the squad, and it's about being smart with our investments in the future and not just buying players for the sake of filling positions. It's really about the sort of the abilities that they can take to the squad rather than just, it's a bargain price deal.
I find it very difficult to find the balance between the two, because you look at the amount of talent that's coming through, what's nice for Aziz is that Arsenal are kind of in a bit of a glut with their centre midfield quality. So I do see a route for him. Even if we were to sign another centre midfielder next to Partey, we've got the likes of Xhaka who's going to move on. Ceballos is leaving. El Nenny's got a year on his contract. Willock, I imagine, will not be at Arsenal for a long period of time. I think it's similar to Nketiah. The club will look to probably move them on before the conclusion of their current deals. But then when you've got like young defensive players, for instance, like you look at Mavropanos coming back from Stuttgart, who's having Drew can tell me if I'm wrong, but from what I've heard in the last few games since he's come back to fitness, he's done quite well. Performed really well against Bayern Munich, performed well against Borussia Dortmund when they played them. So it's players like him when the club are looking to sign another right-sided centre-back, and you've got Saliba, the situation with him, and you've got some young players out on loan that have done well, like McGuinness. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens around those players. The forward line is a really kind of congested area. Nelson, we imagine, is going to be going out on loan this January, if not sold. There's rumours circulating of a possible loan make weight with Norwich for Buendia. Whether that's true or not, we'll have to wait and see. But it is difficult to balance that because you do need to improve the squad, and you can't romanticise too much about players at sometimes. I'd love Saliba to succeed at Arsenal. I'd love Smith Rowe to succeed. I'd love these young players to come through and be the best things ever. But if there is the opportunity for Arsenal to buy a player that transforms that position, they need to do it. You can't just throw all your eggs in the youth basket for a single player because you like them, because they've come through the academy. If there's a chance for Arsenal to sign a player that is going to transform their position, that needs to happen. And it's something that we've probably not done, and we've put too much faith in our young players sometimes when ultimately they should have been moved on sooner. And yeah, I mean, I don't think we can go too much further on that. Let's scroll up and find some more questions that you guys have been putting in earlier on in the chat. I think Kernel of Truth wants to get Jess's thoughts on a backup keeper, a possibility of Arsenal signing one. How have you found Runnerson? Does it give you the confidence to think that Arsenal don't need another keeper?
I mean, I think we all know that he was never brought in to be a number two. I think we thought we were going to be able to bring in the Brentford goalkeeper as the number two, and it didn't work out. So we ended up going with Runnerson as our number two. I'm pretty sure that that's not what we were thinking we were going to do, but ultimately after seeing him in training, I'm sure it was pretty obvious that, I mean, even before that, the, analysis people or whatever were already saying he wasn't that great. So, we definitely need a number two. We're a Leno injury away from being in real trouble because, no offense to Runnerson, but the level is just not there. Like, it's almost like you want to ask Edu, like, is he even good enough to be a number three? Like, what kind of person is this? Like, I was very shocked to see the way he played against Man City. So yeah, we need a backup goalkeeper. I'm sure that we can find one that's not expensive, with Premier League experience, or something like that. I don't necessarily think it has to be David Raya. I think he's a number one goalkeeper. I don't think we need to bring somebody in who's going to expect to be in front of Leno or anything like that. So bring one in and see what happens. But they definitely need to do it in the January transfer window, because I've always felt this way about Arsenal, that we're never the exception. We're always the rule. If something is going to go wrong, it will. So we don't even want to put ourselves in a situation where one little thing can happen for Burn Leno, like, until the end of the season, and we're in real trouble. So I would get anybody that's better than Runnerson at this point.
Anybody, just get anyone.
Anybody.
We'll cut Owen in goal at this stage. This is what we're
Well, how bad must Matt Macy be?
Yeah, that's the worry inside, isn't it? He's old and he is good at football, it seems. He's a massive.
I tagged you in something on Twitter there, Tom, by the way. I think the boys in the chat will be quite interested. Sorry, go on ahead.
Is that the shark that's flying? Is that what you've tagged me in?
Doing research all day.
Yeah. I genuinely have sat back. For those that don't know, and they're just tuning into the podcast, on the Raw Reaction shows, for some reason, we're getting into discussions about whether fish can actually fly. And I've been looking into this, and Someone in the comment sections of yesterday's video tried to tell me that gliding and flying are the same thing. Now, I don't think that's true. I referenced Toy Story 1 as my evidence to say that gliding is very much like Buzz Lightyear falling with style, and I wouldn't class that as flying. Now, as we finish the show, and this is how we're going to finish the show, we usually end with a prediction, which we're going to do with Newcastle. So I'm going to ask you guys for your prediction, your scoreline for Newcastle. And I would also like you to tag on the end of it an explanation as to whether you think fish can or cannot fly. So, Owen, we're going to start with you.
Well, I've given you proof. If anybody wants to see the proof, head over to Tom's.
A picture of a shark suspended in air. This is what
that's not. No, that's a Japanese flying fish.
Sharknado? Is that what it is?
No, it's a Japanese flying fish. In terms of Newcastle, I'll keep our positive run going. I think we'll get. I go 3-1 win. And whether fish can actually fly, well, what outlines the parameters of flying really? You just have to be in the air for a sustained amount of time. It depends. I don't know. Yes, I'm going to go yes because I'm positive, and I agree with the boys in the chat. We will find the fish, but.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed Owen's last appearance on the Guendouzi.
Well, wait. Sorry. What did you teach before you became a writer? What subject? Yeah. See, you're not an animal expert. I'm gonna take Christopher Fung's word for it.
What does Christopher Fung? He works in a hospital, I think. Is it any closer to learning about animals than me? I used to teach about the Amazon rainforest where they had like flying mammals that were not flying. Fish. They weren't flying. They just fell with style, as we described it. Jess, can I have a prediction for you for the Newcastle game? And of course, your own personal opinion about whether fish can or cannot fly.
Let's say 2-1 Arsenal.
I thought you were debating the fish question for a second there.
I don't even know what to say for the fish question. Like, I really don't. So, no, I don't think they can fly.
Good answer.
What are we even talking about? Like, I'm missing it. Like, I'm like, wait, am I missing something? Like, no? Like, okay, I missed it.
So 2-1 Newcastle and fish can't fly. Lovely stuff. Drew, finish the show off with your. I mean, I'd love a Bundesliga explanation as to why fish can or cannot fly. That'd be great. But a prediction for Newcastle would be great. So go for it, mate.
I can't say 2-1 now. So
why? That's not how life works, Drew. Just because one person
I'll concede.
I'll go. You can't say the same thing.
No, I'm trying to not have the same sort of, I don't know, 2-0, I think. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. If I assume we're going to heavily rotate just because there's going to be a lot of players we want to try to find some form for. So I think for that reason alone, we're not going to be able to maybe, bag 3 or 4 goals just because it's going to be maybe a little bit disjointed. But I don't think, Newcastle are in any amount of form for us to be overly concerned with. So I think 2-0 is still a pretty conservative and positive estimate. Fish cannot fly on average. There's a reason why there are fish designated flying fish and everything else is just a fish. So it's not, if all fish could fly, it would just be fish, or they would all be classified as flying fish. So fish can't fly.
Bye, buddy. Chris P, thank you for the donation, says Drew's face is a picture during this flying fish nonsense. Which is great. I love Sabusiso's comment of fish can fly if they believe in themselves. Great. Christopher Funk says, so what is your favourite kind of flying fish? Again, I don't have one because, none of them fly. So we have some gliding fish, which I've looked at, but there's no flying. To be fair, I watched a good 30-minute video of these flying fish jumping out of the water and either getting eaten by a bird or falling back into the water and getting eaten by an even bigger fish. So they don't live particularly privileged lives, it seems.
And that's the premise of tomorrow's tactical breakdown.
Yes, we're going to be looking at the analysis of how fish could play on the right wing should they have been able to fly. So that will conclude today's show. We're going to have to get an emoji made about flying fish. It's just going to have. I'm going to get a fish.
It's like Arsblog with magpie, the same thing.
Yes, it is. We've got our own magpie-esque thing now. It's going to be a fish in an Arsenal shirt with wings, angelic wings and a halo. is what I've got pictured in my mind. We'll get to work on that for sure for the members to use in the chat box. As we round off today's show, thank you, Owen. Much appreciate less so your tweets, but more so your insight on the podcast. Appreciate it.
Apologies, I've been spending too much time with Mike and Andy. They're rubbing off on me slightly. But always great to come back on.
He's going to clip that. You know that, don't you?
Oh yeah, 100%. I throw him little bits of bait out every now and then, so I do, just to sort of keep him on his toes. But no, yeah, definitely, it's good to come on, especially under more positive circumstances in comparison to the last time, and I look forward to our next chat.
Yes, I look forward to that one for sure. And I should say, you are coming back on with Mike and Andy. For some reason, I've allowed this to happen again after the Crystal Palace home game. This is the problem with me setting up a sheet whereby people can book positions. Is that Andy and Owen now and Mike just collaborate to all pick the same dates? That's no, but it's a good no here. And again, just on a personal note, Jess, good luck with the podcast. Congratulations on getting it off the ground. And definitely, I think women are massively underrepresented in regards to the Arsenal podcast and world, the football podcast and world in general. So it's great to see people sort of taking a positive step to rectifying that there. And if you ever need a hand with anything, I'm quite useless, as you can see. But don't be afraid to give me a shout.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you, guys.
No problem.
It's all right. I was just, I mean, you kind of stood on my toes there a little bit. But
I'm trying to steal your thunder. That's why I did it.
But no, Jess, absolutely brilliant debut, and thank you for coming on this evening. And as Owen said so eloquently, good luck with She Knows Arsenal podcast, which of course, as you said, it is because we've got Amanda and Sophie doing Highbury Squad pods, and obviously good friends of the show. So more the better. So yeah, good luck with that. And as Owen said, if you ever need a guest, we're available. So
awesome.
Sure.
I'll get you guys on, I promise.
Awesome. Good stuff. Finally, Drew, the bastion of positivity on the show as always. I much appreciate your time this evening, sir.
Thanks for having me on, buddy. Thanks as always.
No problem at all. And we'll round the show off with our last donation, again from Chris P, who says, did you know that apparently there is no such thing as a fish? So how can there be a flying fish? You're going to scratch your head into oblivion at this stage is what it's going to lean to. Thank you for tuning in this evening. We'll be back again tomorrow. We've got a bit of a break now until the next game being at the weekend. So we've got a few days to fill the shows with. Of course, Tuesdays and Fridays are when we do our Let's Talk Arsenal discussion shows where you guys in the chat box become the main stars of that show. I imagine there will be time for an Emi Buendia tactical breakdown at some stage. So we'll be getting onto that. And just wait. Drew, don't roll your eyes at me, Buendia. It's a good idea. I don't understand. We'll talk about it another time. I'm not going to get into it now, but we'll talk about it. We will see you again very, very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal and cheerio.